Hello and welcome to Full Circle Angling. Today we're doing a little bit of a tackle workshop, which I've got to admit when we first set up the channel wasn't something that I'd envisaged doing, but we've had a request on our previous smoothhound video to do a little bit of a tutorial on how to make the dongle rig, or certainly our take, or should I say Gary's take on the dongle rig. So before we go any further, I have to say Gary's actually away down on the Holderness coast fishing. He's just texted me before he's had a sole. I'm very jealous because I've been sat in the office all day. Never mind, here I am, so it's just me. The dongle rig is I think I'm right in saying a fairly new addition to the sea angling world. Gary and I were fishing. He made up his take on it, his variation on it. On Saturday, used it to great effect, had bass, hounds, subsequently been back and he's had a few more hounds, so definitely works. So in terms of setting it up, we'll get straight into it. It's essentially, and I'm not a carp fisherman, and anybody watching this who does carp fish might say, yeah, I agree, or no, I don't. This is just mine and Gary's personal opinion. Not saying it's right, it's just our take on it. As Gary said on the video, if you've seen it, it's essentially a take on a hair rig that you would use carp fishing for boilie, or even, you know, if you were barbels fishing, river fishing or whatever. So you've got your hook, you've got a knotless knot, and you've got a section with a loop on the bottom where you can mount your bait. Now, in terms of how to tie it, there's various ways you can do it, and it depends on, I would suggest, certainly on this particular variation. I know that a lot of guys out there now are using a big circle hook with a perfection loop and, I don't know, 3-4 inches of 300-pound braid with a couple of knots tied along it to give the bait a bit of grip. I don't know if the reason they're using a perfection loop is to articulate the bait and the hook to give it a bit more free movement. Not sure, maybe it is. In terms of the way that I'm going to show you, the hook is connected via a knotless knot. Now, and your actual dongle, if you like, is still the same piece of mono that you've attached the hook to the line with via the knotless knot. So in terms of the way to tie it, and again, it depends on what sort of rig you're going to use, because the one I'm going to tie now is going to be a pulley rig, and actually it's basically going to be tied from back to front. What I mean by that is because this particular rig, I'm not going to have a hook length section tied to a swivel, tied to the main body. I'm just going to go all the way through, and all I'm going to use is one crimp, which is going to create your pulley system. Now, in terms of length, very complex stuff here. I'm roughly 6 feet. One span, approximately 6 feet. So there you go. You've got a tape measure that's permanently attached to you for your rig making. So, obviously, if you're a bit taller, you've got a longer tape measure. If you're a little bit shorter, you've got a shorter one. Now, in terms of the loop itself, there's various ways you can do it. You could use a perfection loop, you could use a figure-of-8 loop. It largely doesn't really matter, because your loop really just needs to be big enough to clip onto your imp at the bottom of your rig, which we'll come on to in a minute. Now, the loop that I'm going to use for this, because for two reasons. I think it's easier to control the length of the loop that you want to create that's going to link onto your imp than, say, a perfection loop. And the reason I'm not using, say, just a standard overhand loop or a figure-of-8 loop, this is 70-pound mono, it's 0.80, so it's fairly thick. Sometimes with heavier mono, with a figure-of-8 loop, for example, you can pull it, but it sort of springs back and looks a little bit loose, and it never gives me a great deal of confidence unless there's going to be a lot of weight on it. Now, obviously, this is a loop that yeah, there'll be a bit of pressure when you're casting, but by and large, it's just going to be lay on the seabed with a bit of bait on it. Yes, your bait will be linked to your hook, but you still don't want to come undone. So the knot I'm going to use is a non-slip mono knot. So very, very simple. What we're going to do, we're just going to put an overhand half hitch in that. Then we are going to create a small loop, and you're going to go back through that little knot that you've just created. Important to note, your tag end wants to come out the same side of that loop as the rest of your line. Then you can push that through. You can just gently pull that half hitch loop, and now what we can do, we can just adjust that loop to the size that you want. So in this case, that's what, an inch, something like that. Then all you do, take your tag end, 1, 2, 3, 4, and push that back through the loop, but to the side or underneath the two pieces of the two legs to the loop, if you like. Again, coming out the same side as the loop. Now, bit of lubrication, you can just keep hold of your tag end and you can just cinch that down like that. Give it a good pull. Take off your tag end, and there you have your non-slip mono knot, like that. Now, why am I using that loop? For me, you've got to remember with this rig, this is your dongle bit. If you've got bait sat on there, with stiff, heavier mono, you can leave a little bit of a tag end, which straight away acts as a little bit of a barb. As I say, you're going to hook your hook through the bait, but it still just gives you that little bit of rigidity to place your bait on. What you can do, which is similar to what the braid version of this rig is, you could put a couple of half hitches in, again, just to give it a little bit of grip when you put it up. Half hitches in line does weaken it, but don't forget, there's nothing other than when you're casting, you are going to be casting on that. So if you're using a pulley rig, probably not advisable. If you're using a fixed paternoster, as long as you've got a little bit of movement in your system, you can get away with putting a half hitch in. Now, onto the hook, the interesting part. Tag end through the back. This happens to be a 5/0 Varavas Chinook, heavy gauge, really, really good hook, very sharp, a little bit offset there, give you that hooking power. Now, put your line through the back of your hook, and again, £70, if you're only using it, say a 2 or 3/0 hook, some hooks you might not get 2 lengths of £70 0.8 mono through, so bear that in mind when you're tying these. Now, in terms of the length, you can create exactly how long you want that dongle, because as soon as we start putting this knotless knot in, that hook is then going to be fixed. So let's just say, for example, in this instance, you want to give yourself, I don't know, what's that, 3 inches. Quite simply, knotless knot. You've got your line going down the back of the hook. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just going to do 5 here. You can do more, you can do less. I probably wouldn't recommend doing less than, say, 4 with heavy mono. Hold that all in place. Very simple. Oops. line through the back, and there is your knotless knot. Now, unlike the other variation on this dongle rig, perfection loop like that, it doesn't have that same articulation to your mono. Whether that makes any difference, whether it's intended to make any difference, I don't know. I don't know if it's just a fad. People are using a perfection loop instead of a Grinnell or a uni. I don't know. I didn't make the rig up. That is fixed on that line. Now, in terms of when I use this for smooth hound fishing, ray fishing. Whenever I go hound or ray fishing, 9 times out of 10, it's that top hook that catches your fish. The bottom hook, as far as I'm concerned, particularly when hound fishing, is just a mechanism on which to hold your bait, frankly. Now, does the fact that that's, you know, hasn't got full range of motion and it's tied against the line, does that make any difference to the bite hook up rate? Personally, in my own view, I don't think it does, and Gary proved that several times on Saturday on the video, so it definitely works. So that essentially is your main dongle. I'm going to go out and buy spools of braid. You don't have to hook the hook through the braid, which is the reason you need it to be 300 pounds. There's our little dongle that we've just tied. Nip that on. Nip that onto your imp, like so. And there is, very quick, very easy, pulley dongle rig. Perfect for rough ground fishing. And the other thing with this dongle rig seemingly is there's a bit of conservation in mind. It's the same as when you go taupe fishing on the boat. You get your mackerel, you just nick the hook through his jaw and out of his nose. You let your taupe run 4 or 5 seconds and you strike into it. 9 times out of 10 the fish is just hooked in the mouth. Same sort of principle here. The fish can have a go at the bait. Unlike a pennel rig, he doesn't feel the metal or something that's unnatural. You can strike him, hopefully you just get him in the scissors. Great. And you could use that on rough ground. In fact, I'm going to go have the first Northumberland Rock session later on this week. Video coming up on that. Hopefully you can catch a few fish. I'm going to use this very rig that I've just tied. Of course, when you're rough ground fishing, 70 pounds straight through, heavy gauge hook, I'm going to use a rotten bottom with that. If that gets caught in the rock, you know, you're either going to pull it through the kelp or it's going to snap off. It's just the way it is with rock fishing. So that's our variation on the dongle, should I say, Gary's variation on the dongle. It'll be the first time I've personally used it, but as I say, Gary's used it. Non-slip mono knot, knotless knot, dead simple. Okay, so the other question that was asked today on the channel was, could you use this rig with worm baits? Because 9 times out of 10, you're going to be using that rig with crab, squid, bluey, sand eel, mussel, i.e. something that you are putting a lot of elastic on, and then you are baiting that up and nicking that in the top of the bait, probably, I don't know, 1/2 inch in the top of the bait, so that hook's got a good firm hold. Now, for your finer worm baits, question is, can you use this rig for a worm bait? It's straight away your dongle, instead of being 3-4 inches, if you're using, I don't know, you might be using a king rag, you might be using a yellowtail or a couple of yellowtails even, or a one long black lug, you're going to want to make your dongle a little bit longer. Now, just for ease, I'm just going to quickly tie this, because this is lighter. This is 0.37 Varavas fluorocarbon, so I'm guessing on your worm baits you might be fishing for plaice, dabs, flounder, sole, over clean ground. You might want to be using your fluoro or lighter mono. So I'm just going to do a simple overhand loop on that, because it's lighter line, as I said before. I think it grips a bit better. You can leave yourself a little bit more tag if you want, because if that's facing up, that's another good knot to use, because that tag is facing up. So any worm up here, it's a little barb to try and secure it in place. I'm not saying it's going to, you know, it's not going to solely keep a worm in place. It's not, but it's not going to do any harm either. It's going to be a little bit of help. So this is, for example, if we were fishing for smaller flatties, this is a mustard 1/0 fine wire. Again, knotless knot. It's a longer shank than the other one. Now, you might want to go, I don't know, what's that? 6 inches, something like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to go 6, 7, 8 on that. Through the back of the hook. Bang. There is your knotless knot. And there is what could be used as a dongle rig for a worm bait. Now, a couple of things with this. Using worm baits, you're probably going to want to be using slightly finer mono or fluoro. I dare say you could get away with something a bit thicker if you were using a huge king rag, for example. In terms of the actual presentation of the bait, yeah, I think it'll be pretty good. It's not going to have a hook going through, you know, the mid or the bottom section of the tail. The hook's only going to be perhaps nicked in, I don't know, the top couple of centimetres of the bait, so it's going to have a lot more movement in the water. The fish isn't going to feel anything as he eats up the worm and onto the hook. Downside, in my opinion, from what I'm picturing might happen, because I have to, you know, I haven't used this yet, you might find you're getting a lot of missed bites if you've got, you know, 6 inches of worm before you've got a hook. Yes, you could make this shorter, you could do. You might find you've got a lot more missed baits. But if you're flatty fishing, probably wouldn't recommend this match fishing because you want to be catching everything. If you're pleasure fishing, flatty fishing, and you've conservation in mind, and you want to give the fish the best chance of survival and not swallowing the hook, this may well be worth checking out. The only other thing I would mention, a couple of things. That's about, I don't know, say £20 break and strain. If you're using a pulley rig, you do not want to be power casting with a snood length of only £20. Yes, your rig body might be 60, 70, 80, but there's still pressure on that hook length when you're casting a pulley rig. Just because your rig body is stronger doesn't mean it's safe, so bear that in mind. If you're using a fixed paternoster, however, where you've got your rig body is the spine of your rig, if you like, fair enough, it's okay. If you're using a flapper rig, now, the thing to remember on that is, because that is going to fly through the air, as you're casting, your sinker's going to go that way, the worm's going to go that way into the wind. The tendency with the physics around that is it's going to want to push the worm back away from the hook. Now, if you know, worms aren't particularly tough compared to a whipped up bait. Yes, I know, you know, blacklug are fairly tough considering the worms, but if you're just flicking it, you should be all right. If you're hitting it a bit harder, bear in mind that could happen. As I say, I haven't used this. It's just what I'm thinking might happen. That could fly up there, and you'll be left with no bait. Worth bearing in mind. Alternatively, if you've got a clip rig, let's just take our imp here. Your sinker is flying into the wind, and that worm is only getting pushed up towards that hook. So you shouldn't have any problems. To be fair, if you're worm fishing, fluoro, light line, small hooks, I'm guessing you're not going to be blasting it anyway. So that is our take on the dongle rig, utilising the knotless knot and the non-slip mono knot loop. Hope that's been helpful. Get out there, give it a try. I'm certainly going to give it a try on Friday this week when I get up to the Northumberland coast. Hopefully catch a few kelpie cod and maybe a wrasse. So hope that's been helpful. Tight lines. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.